Hi, it's Deborah Carter here from New Tech Kids. In today's Preparation Tech interview, we're speaking with Jubin Majlessi, who is a management consultant. And Jubin has had a very interesting career and is very knowledgeable about tech companies and just advising companies in general. So let's just start off by asking Jubin, what do you do? What does a management consultant do?
Hi, Deborah, and thanks for having me here. Management consultants, I think to understand management consulting, it's good to understand 2 point of views. One from the point of view of clients, and the other from the point of view of the consulting industry and sort of the value chain of services that are provided. So basically, clients have problems that they need to solve, and sometimes those problems require more expertise than they have and more scale than they have. Now, some people might ask, why would a company not have the right expertise in solving a problem they need to solve? And for the most part, when they're running their day-to-day business, and it's basically their job to solve certain problems that they have, right? Without the problems, they wouldn't really have a job. They can. But sometimes they want to solve a problem that they've never encountered before because it requires a new type of expertise. For example, they want to sell a new kind of product or service they've never sold before, or they want to move into a geography they've never been in before, or deal with a new client type that they've never dealt with before, right? In this case, it makes sense to get the advice of firms and people who have worked across an industry with several clients or several types of firms that they may even compete with. And other times, maybe the problem is a bit more narrow and requires a very specific expertise that's scarce in general, they don't have, right? So I think, very high level, management consultants are problem solvers in areas that are a bit inaccessible for various kinds of firms and various kinds of industries, depending on what they're trying to achieve. Now, that answer tends to tie, and the management consulting moniker tends to tie very much with strategy. Why do I want to do something? And it's very much around, basically bringing in frameworks, giving advice, bringing in things like best practice, which is an overused term, and helping a client understand the right decision to make with the highest probability, and trying to also help the client understand the risks that are involved in taking on this kind of decision, to hopefully also mitigate those risks. So you have firms like the McKinseys, the Bains, the Booz Allens, the BCGs, the Roland Bergers, who have traditionally been very strategy focused. And some of those firms, like McKinsey, I think, basically started the industry several decades ago, I think 50 years ago or something. And then you have other firms who do strategy like that, but also do transformation and implementation. And that's because whenever strategic advice is provided, usually it means there's a decision to be made, and the decision leads to some kind of change. So there are firms who offer expertise in those kinds of transformations, because those transformations impact people, processes, operating models. They tend to have an impact on technology that actually is used to make that change happen, or is maybe the end goal of the change. And then you get firms such as the Big Four, like Deloitte, PwC, Ernst & Young, KPMG, and various other firms, who offer strategy, but also really focused on the expertise around transformation. Then you also have the kind of consulting services that relate to implementation of technologies and the services that continue once the implementation has taken place. That some firms or clients, as I call them, cannot or do not want to run themselves. right? So you get outsourcing. And those are firms that, there are firms out of India like Infosys, TCS, Wipro. There are other firms all around the world, the US, France, everywhere, like Atos, Cognizant, IBM, various firms who offer a lot of those things. The reason I tell you about these three different kinds of firms is that you traditionally had strategy, which was tied very much to the management consulting definition. Then you have transformation and implementation. And then you have sort of services and various technical aspects that get run, also operational aspects that get run in the form of outsourcing. But what's happened in the past few years, certainly in the past 5 years, I would say in the past 10 years, there's been a big evolution towards all of this kind of being combined within the same firms. So everybody's starting to play in everybody's space. Even the strategy firms I mentioned before that sort of have the most reputable names, they have units and arms now that are dedicated and focused on technical aspects and implementation and not on strategy at all. They hire different kinds of people there. You have firms like Accenture who started off as Andersen Consulting, but then of course that transformed for various other reasons after the year 2000. But they became actually what I think is becoming this amalgamation of services that combines strategy, implementation, transformation, and services that are run in the form of outsourcing. By the way, I don't work for Accenture. I've never worked for Accenture. I'm not pushing them right now. All I'm saying is that's an example of a company where I think a lot of things are going, and I have also experienced in various firms, some of which I've mentioned, that the strategy is really towards offering all of these services end-to-end, strategy through implementation and running services. You have a question, I think?
Yeah, I do have a question. So a young kid out of school, first out of the undergrad, where can they fit themselves into consulting companies? Tell us a bit about the hiring process. Are these firms looking for super experienced people, or are they looking for people out of school with technology skills?
That's a good question. So I think it's a bit of both. I think what's really happening is so many different kind of services are being provided now that scale is being offered with a lot of expertise that's required. So you'll see. So we're talking about the big firms now, right? So it can be very different with a boutique, a small consulting firm that's 10 people, 20 people, let's say less than 50 people. That's a little bit different because they may have a very specific focus, requires a very specific skill set. But if we're talking about the big names that I was mentioning before, then basically it's about combining a whole series of expertise. So I think the major difference is 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you wouldn't see too many developers, programmers hired into some of the firms I mentioned, especially the strategy and transformation firms. They might be hired into some of the firms I mentioned out of India and IBMs and those sort of things. But nowadays, you certainly get them hired into all of the firms I mentioned, without a doubt. But they're definitely not doing the same things that, let's say, someone who focuses purely on usability, right? Which nowadays you can even get a master's in user experience, right? Or someone who has a pure business background, right? And is maybe also focusing on things like organizational transformation and the impact to people, right? That's a very different skill sets than the other skill sets that are there, but also 100% required in these firms. When it comes to the technology side of things, because I think that's a bit of what we're talking about here, technology itself, if you think about it, is all about a stack of services, a stack of layers that make up an entire solution, an entire offering. And each layer of that stack, whether it's someone in infrastructure, someone in databases, someone in programming, someone in interfacing, someone in understanding protocols between systems, someone who's bringing that all together, basically you need all of it engaged in any major transformation. And even when you're only advising and trying to give clients advice on which way to go, which systems, technologies, platforms to choose, which partners to engage in, and let's say you're not even implementing it, you still need that expertise now in order to give proper advice. That's going to, you can't give such high level advice anymore without providing enough detail that the clients understand the risks that they're taking on, right? And can select the right partners and platforms to implement. So I would say the important thing is to try to specialize as much as you can, while keeping in mind understanding the broader picture is very valuable. Now, understanding the broader picture probably comes a little bit more while you're working, because you get access to the different projects and problems to solve that are real life problems, or maybe interning, whereas in academics and school, when you're learning, it's really good to dive into the details of expertise and come out to be, as good as you can be in it. Usually you can take that kind of technical expertise and go into various areas. And when you're in those various areas, really try to not just continue being better and better at that specialty, but understanding why that specialty is there and how it impacts all the other layers of technology and all the aspects of business. Why the business does what it does, what it brings to its customers, why the operating model is set up the way it is, how the industry, so competitors and complementers, and how that industry value chain, why it's there, why there's so many parties involved in something, how the technology maybe can even remove some of those parties in that value chain to make things more efficient. Mm-hmm. It's key to be able to combine, I think, your specialty with an understanding of the broader picture.
Mm-hmm. Give us an idea of what you actually do in concrete terms. So do you sit with clients and listen to their problems and then go back and write strategy? What does the process look like? We're trying to give parents, teachers, and school guidance counselors kind of an idea of what a management consultant does on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So management consultants, let's say, kind of coming out of school or in the first few years of their career, because the things that you do are a little bit different as you become a bit more senior or you get to the director and partner levels. So basically when you're coming out of school, you basically are going in to analyze problems that are there and sit with clients to understand the details of those problems, right? And try to bring in frameworks that the company has or that you've learned from your background or discipline in your schools, and apply those frameworks to the problem they're trying to solve. And there's no one framework or one way to do something in consulting, because there's so many different types of services that you can bring. So as an example, most of the firms I mentioned provide cybersecurity consulting, right? Which most of those did not provide that 10 years ago. Some not even 5 years ago, right? But it's a huge mega thing. That's in a way, that's very specialized, very specific. And it's good to have a programming background if you're going to get into that. It's good to have an infrastructural background. It's good to understand the way systems are secured or protect themselves from the outside, but also it's good to understand who on the inside of companies can access those systems. And also get engaged in cybersecurity issues and problems. Sometimes things are even just physically accessing things, right? But that same expert who came out of school with a programming background and got into cybersecurity could have probably also gone into gaming, or could have gone into, let's say, the digital side of consulting. Digital is kind of a broad term, but every consultancy is using that. Sort of the customer-centric customer journey across their digital experience, right? And build apps and things like that that the customer can try to use and improve on, and maybe use data and advanced analytics and data analytics to solve the digital the customer journey in a way that the customer is getting what they need, right? But the foundation of that can be that same foundation the person had in school, which is just understanding certain programming languages, or having a pure focus on data and the way data analytics works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to get back to your question, it's around, what is it they do day to day? Well, it's very much about working with teams and team members to understand the purpose of the project, why you're hired as a consultancy to go in, the problem you're trying to solve, making sure that you're staying in line with that problem you're trying to solve, connecting directly, usually with the clients, either on-site or remotely, with the specific problem within the problem, because if you're on a big team, everybody's not solving exactly the same thing at all times, and you're all bringing different specialties, right? And then keeping both the team members, your lead for the project, and the client involved and engaged in the progress of what you're doing, recognizing that when you're solving a problem, there is the tasks and the things that you've agreed on that have to get done, but there's also an unpredictable future you're creating because you're transforming, and being able to mold what it is you're trying to do with new things that you're figuring out while you're solving problems. And maybe even recognizing that the problem that the client wanted solved is not always the exact problem to solve. There are other things to solve. And maybe even the sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, the senior executive who sold the project maybe didn't fully understand the problem with the client. And then there's actually more to solve than was originally realized, right? And how to deal with that. Now, just so we're clear, that example I gave you, it's not something I've done a lot, or many should be doing a lot, but it happens because people make mistakes, and you need to be accountable for those mistakes. But the point is, it trickles down into the team. And if you're just out of university and you're experiencing projects for the first time, you will find that when you do all those things, unpredictable things will happen. As a consultant, you try to minimize the unpredictable. You try to risk mitigate. You do that through communicating really well, communicating transparently, not being scared to ask when you don't know what to do. And probably, I think, combining the two most important things to combine are your analytical skills, so being able to problem solve efficiently and effectively, with creative and emotional intelligence skills. Because in an unpredictable future setting, the creative side of things and the emotional intelligence will help you approach dealing with those unpredictable aspects in a much more successful way.
Since you're on the topic kind of the characteristics and the mindset that is needed to be successful, let's dive deeper into it. What would you say are the top characteristics of someone who thrives in management consulting?
Okay, so I think just touching on what I was just saying, I mean, I think a lot of people know that the analytical skills need to be there, and that's why a lot of engineers and people who have backgrounds that are a bit scientific in that sense tend to be brought into management consulting, and effectively often people are tested in these kind of things during the interview process to see how good they are at problem solving, right? And people will be given real life case studies and problems to solve. And it's not so much about the answer that you give as much as it is the approach you take in getting from the question posed to the approach you take and the answer that you give. How you really got there is it kind of gives everybody an idea of the way your brain works. Mm-hmm. How you get from the high level down to the low level.
Well, I have a question for you. So you're saying that people with a scientific background do well, or are positioned to do well. What about the people from the arts and from design? Because I would say they may have different frameworks for thinking, but their frameworks can be just as creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you see now is you get a lot more people who are in consultancies and management consultancies hired from those areas than used to be. I'm not saying that there's more from those areas than the traditional areas, which tend to be things like engineering backgrounds or heavy business backgrounds, or a bit of technology consulting, obviously technology backgrounds. But now you see a lot of people out of design, creative sides of things. You see startups and smaller firms that are acquired by the larger firms oftentimes come from these design areas and things like that. And that's critical. But I would argue that they're very good at problem solving. They're very good at that analytical thinking. They're very good at bringing frameworks in. They're just not coming from the same academic discipline necessarily, or have the same degree that the traditional consulting firms have been bringing people in from, right? So actually, in a way, I would say they are the same kinds of people, just from different places. And one of the reasons that they're being accessed now is because of the client demands, and because technology is sort of like taken over as the tools that are being used and implemented at these clients, you know, as opposed to paper-based things and processes, right? So it's sort of like we've created this fantastic access to people who can do things that we didn't know they could do, right, originally. Or maybe it's also a combination of those people may have gone into different disciplines in the 80s and 90s, and now in the 2000s and 2010s and on, they're going into these areas that give them more fulfillment, you know. So I would totally agree with that. So that's the analytical side of things. But I would say the creative and especially emotionally intelligent side or characteristic is key. And emotional intelligence is not something that you're necessarily born with. It comes from experience. So it's something that you can, if you also feel you don't have it for some reason, you can acquire it. You just need to focus on it, right? The reason it's so important is consulting, like anything that is about change and transformation and dealing with people, and also about persuasion in your direction. And that's not about tricking people into your direction. It's getting, you know, it's kind of getting people to realize what the answer is, right, themselves a bit, and just sort of taking that journey with them and understanding what it is that they're one, trying to get to, but also understanding that what you're doing is going to impact a lot of people and a lot of processes. And that can be staff working at the client that you have. That could be their customers. It can have a real big effect on, especially nowadays where technology is taking over a lot of people's operational processes and jobs. It's really important to be cognizant of people's reactions, why they're saying what they're saying, cultural differences. You know, that's a major one. You'd be amazed at, maybe you wouldn't be amazed, you probably have experience, but well, the people who are speaking to through you, I think you would be amazed at how still today in major firms that seem so professional, just simple cultural misunderstandings taking place, because everybody's trying to do the same thing, maybe in one language that's not their own language, and their brains are conceptually processing things differently, right? It's important to have that sort of awareness to be successful in consulting.
Right. So I have before me through Zoom, this very passionate management consultant. Take us back to your childhood so that we can understand and maybe see the path that you've taken to get where you are. Tell us what you were interested in, your hobbies as a child, what your school experience was, and then how you kind of progressed in your career.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So I mean, some hobbies I had growing up. I mean, I played a lot of different sports. I was into sci-fi. I kind of I had a lot of friends, but I wasn't the most popular person. I kind of liked to access everything. So it's not that I was the ultimate programmer or something, or I wasn't the ultimate jock, or I wasn't, it was a bit more jack of all trades type of thing, so that I could just experience everything. And I'm not saying I was doing that willingly or voluntarily. It's just looking back, that's what I would do. And I think that played a big role in my mentality of being in the industry and sector that I'm in. I hated and still hate routine. Well, it's not that I hate all routine. I have kids now as well, and there are a lot of things I love about the routine. But I get a lot of my energy, and almost all my energy growing up from what's happening next, and how can I do this, or how can I entertain myself with that, or who can I play with now, or okay, I've been at this company, and suddenly I'm doing the same repetitive thing. What's the next company I'm going to go to? And it's not surprising to me that I ended up getting into two things: technology and into consulting, because effectively that's that kind of playground. So I would say that for me, and it's not the same for all consultants, but for me, it's very much about just exploring many things constantly. Now, I just want to add something there. It's that I think that it's a good quality for people to have. At the same time, it's also good to be an expert in something. So I like the combination of having a bit of an anchor you can use to create the opportunity to meet and talk to people and generate just either fulfillment in life or opportunities in business, right? For me, that anchor was a specific industry sector, capital markets and investment management, and the technology behind it, right? So that was kind of my niche, my sort of, my roll call, my kind of, that's how I have created a bit of my own name or reputation, if I have one, in my area. But if you look at all the projects and stuff I've done, just like growing up, and everything I was doing, it's all over the place, and I think the key is the combination of having a go-to that you can talk about with credibility, and that you can have an opinion on and solve problems with credibility, while at the same time having an interest, a genuine interest in being in places that you don't know that well, or that might be a bit scary at first, and that you learn about or that you explore. So like time and time again in my life, I was always, and again, not necessarily voluntarily, but putting myself in places that were really scary in the beginning and uncomfortable. And I would really had very little confidence in the beginning. And then sometimes it would lead me to extreme confidence and great expertise. And I don't mean just in the job, like also in just in life and growing up as a kid. And other times it would fail and I would be very insecure, and I think that created the path that I took from different kind of company, different kind of service to different kind of consulting offering, from geographically from the US, where I'm from, to Europe, the Netherlands, where I live now, and to the companies who hired me, and the clients who gave me business. I think that was a big part of creating that success.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned capital markets, which is scary for a lot of people, including me, because finance is not my thing. If you talk about subject matter expertise, can you trace like what interested you in the beginning and what led to capital markets? Were you really great at math? at science, and then you just cultivated that through high school into university?
So it's not that I was amazing at any particular subject. I do love sciences. It's not, I don't have a love for math, but sciences like physics, biology, chemistry, things in that realm. That was not my my master's degree or my bachelor's. It wasn't in that, but I like it. So there is some logical aspect to my background or analytical aspect to my background. But I also have certain creative sides as well, and you know, I've dove into languages and things like that, and music. But you know, I think actually what got me into capital markets and everything was being from New York. And when I was graduating from university, you know, companies come in to interview and things like that. And I had a goal, and my goal was to be financially independent, not relying on my family at all, and just like exploring the world. Whether that world was only New York or just, you know, this new world, you know, independence really. And, you know, the proximity of Wall Street and it being such a big thing there just gave me more access to companies like that than other companies. And, you know, I found my way into actually on a trading desk. I was hired into DLJ. They were an important bank back then. They were acquired. And I was an equities trader for about a year. And I learned all about basically trading in capital markets there. I had learned a little bit about it in university, but especially capital markets, you need to learn it, you know, at an investment bank, at an asset manager, you know, at an exchange, at a custodian, really like in the field, right? And so that got me into it. But then I also recognized that being on a trading desk every day in the exchange hours is killer for someone like me, as I explained before, who doesn't like routine. And I just can't do the same thing every day. I couldn't even walk the same commute in the city every day. I would take just a different path across the grid of Manhattan, you know. And so there was a big technology arm there, and online brokerage was becoming big. And so I moved into, I convinced my managers and everything, that's where I should be. And I moved into the quality assurance area of the technology arm. Nobody understood what a technology firm did then. It's just like this firm that does technology. What does that mean? So I learned about technology being at the technology firm and quality assurance, where you're testing things. You get to test everything. You know, so you kind of need a business background to test it. And then you get to connect with every different department of the technology firm and start to understand technology. And the next step was also something similar. It was a high-tech firm implementing on trading desks software where they had only technologists. They needed kind of business people. So I went there, and through using my business background as an anchor, again, I learned more and more about technology. And by the way, all of these jobs being on trading desks taught me about capital markets. So I ended up learning about the depths of capital markets and the sort of depths of technology without, you know, I was a trader for a year, but that's not that long, okay? So without actually doing the business and trading, and without actually like programming or being a heavy technologist. It was about being on the trading desk, being involved in the projects, helping to implement them, connecting on all aspects of the projects, and seeing many different kinds of clients where those things were happening. So seeing different operating models, different businesses, but doing the same thing, right? I mean, basically like trying to accomplish the same thing, which is trading. So I guess my story to you here is you can learn some of those things that are high performance areas like capital markets and subject matter expertise areas of industries and business in academics, but it will seem trivial compared to actually being at the client or being at a firm where you really get into the details of what happens day to day. The best thing to do, I would say, is in the academic side, get your frameworks down, get your concepts down, get your way of problem solving down. Try to also understand certain aspects of specialty that academics are very good at. So for example, in programming, you can understand all the concepts of programming languages and the differences between them and how they're used and things like that. But then when you want to apply them to business problems and various other non-business problems that take place that happens at companies, right? So it's a difficult question to answer, but specifically about capital markets, it's really about being there. So as an academic, try to go and intern in those places.
Yeah, it's funny that you say it because several people that I've interviewed are saying the same thing. In fact, the IP and patent lawyer that I spoke to said, there's two things. There's the way of thinking, but there's the subject matter expertise. And when you can combine these two,
yeah,
that is really effective in terms of future proofing you for any job or role that you'll go into.
I agree. And I think that parallels the combination of having the analytical trait and the creative and emotional intelligence trait. It's the combination of these two things that they act as they can act as a differentiator, but it's more that by combining them, you get to access so much more of our abilities that you find a better you in what you're doing. It may also be a differentiator against people who don't have necessarily both of those things when they're also working. But I think the more important thing is you take yourself to a different level. You find the stronger and better and a more accessible you by being aware of both of those things and trying to use both of those things at all times.
Right. Two questions more. The first one is, typically when a lot of people hear about management consulting, they go, ooh, very white, very male, oh. And for people in the underrepresented groups, they're like, maybe this isn't for me. So my question to you is, are the management consulting firms inclusive? Is there a place for women, people of color, other people outside of the white male mainstream?
So it's a great question, and it's one of the biggest questions globally in many different facets, not just management consulting, right? So I would say that a few things here. It depends on the country, for sure, because also in management consulting, usually every country is kind of its own entity, and it was created and built separately on its own with some influence from either the global headquarters, but there are partnerships that have been built locally. So each country kind of has addressed that topic differently over the years in the way they were built. But even the listed companies, publicly listed companies, have differences per country as well, simply because of where people are and the kind of demographics that are in those countries, right? And how those educational systems gave different peoples of different cultures access to different things, right? It depends on the country, and I can address some of the country. In consulting, I would say overall, there is definitely a place for everybody, and it's improving, but it's definitely not inclusive enough. It's not even close. So, most of and I'm in the Netherlands right now, many of the consultancies you walk into, you will not get the feeling that it is diverse. There is diversity in them. And I'm not just talking about cultural background and color. I'm also talking about gender. I'm also talking about, sexual orientation. It's there and everybody talks about it. And there's, I would say, a great respect for the topic in a way I've never seen before, let's say 2015, 2016. And easily since 2018, it's becoming exponentially more important. So that was actually very nice to see, because also I'm not from the Netherlands. So I also feel a bit of a difference being here when I kind of go into places. I also, I'm American and I've lived in a lot of places before. I have a Persian background. which is not like typical everywhere. And in fact, interestingly, that background in the Netherlands and Northern Europe is very different than the background in the US, because many Persians here were refugees from the various countries they came from, like Iran, whereas in the States, they tended to be going for higher education. So then the views of society on that are very different. So it's kind of interesting to see people's reactions in both places. But that's what I mean also by I'm from New York, in New York City, and also in London. I've spent a lot of time in London. There is a lot of diversity everywhere you go. And also in the companies I've worked in, I see a lot more diversity there. I mean, clearly, and also the way people react in New York and London versus some other countries. It's a bit more like, it's just commonplace to see the diversity. So people just react a bit more, blind to the differences, a bit more, not completely, but relative to some other places where I just think there's still this bubble of experience, and it's subtle. I have experienced some very blatant ones, which is not very good, but that does not represent the masses. So I won't bring those up. It's the subtle issues with diversity that I think are what we need to overcome a bit more, because it makes everybody feel like they don't understand why it isn't more diverse, or why they can't get a promotion, or why there is a pay gap between genders or cultural backgrounds and things like that. Is it being addressed? Yes, it is being addressed. Is it being addressed fast enough? No. Is there an answer that I have? No. I can't say I don't think anybody has an answer or the answer. I think the best thing we can do is focus on it as much as we can, speak up about it as much as we can. And I think that's one of the things we're learning a lot, especially right now. And since this is recorded and nobody knows, sometimes people see this years later or something. This is like the time where George Floyd and everything going on in the U.S. is happening. So it's a really intense and sensitive time. One of the biggest things that I think everybody is realizing and learning is that people are just being too quiet about it, and that's just amplifying the problem. So everybody's to blame. So I think it's really important for people to just continue talking about it, continue making the opportunities available for the non-typical backgrounds, and over time, we'll see transition, and hopefully it's in the right direction.
Absolutely. So my final question is, you're a parent of children, several children. What advice do you have for parents, teachers, and school guidance counselors in terms of engaging kids around technology and helping them to combine their passions with this knowledge of technology? What specific things could parents, teachers, school guidance counselors be doing to actually really make kids passionate about technology?
That's a good question. I think fundamentally, our first problem, and this might not be all over the world, but in places I've experienced the problem, the core curriculum of the educational system is not including technology enough, and certainly not in an early enough age. So we consider language and certain humanities and literature to be core in our educational system, and has been for a long time, rightly so. But technology is very similar in that sense, where there are aspects to it that are similar, right? There are programming languages. There are fundamental things that impact everything we do and will do in the future. There are creative sides to it. There's a combination of the analytical and creative sides to it that are key. And there's ample evidence around this, by the way, Many of the best technologists and programmers around are also fantastic musicians. And there's a lot of similarities to the way music is read and written down and processed with the way programming languages are and things like that. And the same way, they also show that music amplifies children's ability to just mature, but also address academics and improve different aspects of their mind and technology and different aspects of it. I think do that as well. Now, so I think one thing is we need to get it in the core curriculum. Then the other thing is incorporating it in the things that everybody's doing throughout the day, or sorry, that the students are doing throughout the day in the schools. So right now it's very much an extracurricular activity. Like you offer great extracurricular programs and things like that. I also try to give my kids access to different kind of things online, but that tends to be, like videos and via YouTube and things like that. Or, to me, something like Lego is a perfect example of something that gets you into like logical thinking, building things in a certain way, problem solving, all the kind of things that are also used in technology. The thing is, technology is going to be, and almost already is, in almost everything that they do when they grow, whether it's in the job they have or what they're doing at home with their families, or how they're, in transport and commuting. I mean, I can compare, my kids now to when I was a kid. I mean, there's so many things that and just take this whole working from home and staying from home and lockdown situation. Like, how great has it been to be able to offer online teaching from all schools to keep the kids engaged and their brains working because of technology. And if it was the first time the kids had ever been on an iPad, it would have been a disaster. Or the first time that I had ever used it, a disaster. So I think the key is it has got to be in the core curriculum. And then through that, kids are doing things throughout the day at school and at home and things like that, where technology can be accessed to sort of complement what they're doing. And when you're complementing what you're doing and you are associating that with fun activities, then the two just come together. And yeah, I think, maybe that's a bit of a high level answer, but I think that is the key, is that everybody takes it as a discipline that they have to learn and that they're using in order to learn as sort of tools for learning.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic answer, because it isn't just putting the responsibility on the formal school system, but it's also saying it's a combination. It's school, but it's also parents creating opportunities for them to really make technology personal and useful in their daily lives. And that, I think, is a great balance. Jubin.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one interesting example, which you could argue is this technology or not, I would say it is every morning while my daughter, who's 7, starts her homework on the iPad with the instructions that are there. My son is 5, so he's not doing as much homework, right? He's doing other things. He's doing yoga on YouTube for about an hour. It's actually Pokemon yoga.
Wow.
So it's kind of, he's utilizing a technology tool that is also an interactive tool, right? Accessible through social media outlets like YouTube and things like that. That tool is actually also assessing his needs and what he's doing and providing him with other options. And so he did yoga, Spider-Man, yoga, whatever, and then other things that weren't even related to yoga, but tied different interests together that he has, right? And has been able to entertain him, give him exercise, stimulate his mind. He talks about it. Then he FaceTimes with a friend, and they're 5, he's FaceTiming with a friend for maybe 20 minutes, talking about that, and then starting to basically interact on the topic of whatever was Spider-Man, Pokemon, whatever it is. That's all enabled by technology, and he's influenced by that technology, you know, and it's become normal to him, right? To me, that is that combination of getting something out of it physically, mentally, and it being really pure play technology. So I think that alone, you know, every day, that one thing alone can make a big difference in his ability to access what technology is.
And the benefits that it brings as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jubin, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for this interview.
Thanks,
and so the lesson here, as Jubin mentioned, was to have subject matter expertise and also to have a framework of how to think and solve problems. And if your kid is analytical, then management consulting may be a great career path for them. So thank you, Jubin, and I look forward to following your career and seeing where life takes you.
Thank you, Deborah. Take care. Good speaking to you.